All right. Hello, everyone. We are back. Just looking at everything, making sure the microphone is working and the recording light is on. We are back. I'm recording this Monday in the evening around 8 o'clock. Back for the final week of lectures. We're going to wrap up the 20th century here, maybe move into some themes of the 21st century in the final lecture. Let's get into the decline and the fall of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War, and the rise of modern China. After this, we'll do some genocides in the 1990s. Last lecture, we'll talk about 9/11 and some things that come after that. So, as we've come out of the midterm, you've seen the end of the long 19th, the opening of the 20th with the First World War, everything after that, the interwar period, fascism, the Second World War, beginning of the Cold War, all of the partitions and proxy wars. How does the Cold War come to an end? All of the decolonization and proxy wars coming out of the Second World War. It does not end with a final culminating war between the United States and their allies and the Soviet Union and their allies. Soviet Union will fall apart. It will collapse. It will not be a hot war. There's no bombing of Moscow. No NATO tanks will invade. It will be an economic and political falling apart of the Soviet Empire. In the 1970s, we will see the beginnings of a period we'll refer to as détente, the easing of hostilities or strained relations between countries, moving back from open hostility to more regularized relationship. So, détente between the United States and the Soviet Union, particularly after the U.S. is beginning to withdraw from Vietnam. We see the SALT Treaty, SALT 1 and SALT 2. This is reducing the number of nuclear warheads, the number of nuclear weapons in the arsenals within each nation, the number of intercontinental ballistic missiles. As I said about the NASA and the space programs, everything they did was good and wonderful, but of course, this was research into rockets and how they can deliver a nuclear payload across the planet. My friend from grad school, Mike St. Jacques, when he was still in the 1990s, when these treaties were still in place with the former Soviet Union, he was one of these inspectors that they still were counting the missiles on each side to make sure we were in agreement with these treaties. Ronald Reagan is elected the U.S. president in 1980. And he gets rid of the longstanding policy of détente coming out of the end of Vietnam. So these years of regularizing relationships with the Soviet Union, he says no. He calls out the Soviet Union as an evil empire publicly in speeches, says he's going to ramp up the Cold War. Well, how does he do this? He says we're going to create a safety net in outer space that will protect us from your intercontinental ballistic missiles, whether they're fired from submarines at sea or they're fired from your bases in Kazakhstan, just as our bases are in the Midwest and the center of the country. We will put in systems of satellites and land bases to intercept them and shoot them down. And what he's counting on is that the Soviets won't have any response to this. This is never anything we can put into action, but we began implementing research and development into it. We also conduct war games in Europe. And in 1983, during a exercise called Able Archer, we will coordinate with our NATO allies in a simulation of an invasion of East Germany and Eastern Europe with land forces and air forces and nuclear missile forces that is so convincing to the people of the Soviet Union that they will put their forces on high alert, believing that this exercise is just a cover for a real invasion. And the Soviets will go to the highest level of alert that they've been to since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Well, how are things going in the Soviet Union? During the 1970s, following the departure from leadership of Khrushchev, we see leaders like Brezhnev, Leonid Brezhnev, from the Brezhnev doctrine. These are not Bolsheviks. Many, if not most, of the original Bolsheviks had been killed in the purges of Stalin. Those that remained were dying out. And those that were taking positions of power in the party and the government, they had grown up under Stalin and under Khrushchev. And they were being now told that this is socialism in reality. This is the socialist state. We are superpower. And we will work at making this a more efficient state, but this is socialism in reality, what we have created. Well, this is unproductive. Think of what we learned about in China. They are not being paid in a salary, they're being paid in a home allotment and in food allotments and so forth. They're being paid in their children's education and so forth. There is no incentive for a higher worth ethic. You understand? Very low morale. And the goods and services that are available to them are incredibly low quality compared to what is available in the West. The Soviets are propping up their satellite states. So they are spending money to keep up the militaries and the economies of their Warsaw Pact allies. Things like the Soviet Afghan War moving into the 1980s are also draining a command economy. We've already learned about this. So there's no reason to go into the details of this because we've had a whole lecture on it. I mentioned this earlier, but I think this bears a little bit more detail so you know just exactly what went on here. So while all of this is going on for the Soviet Union, remember the Iran Iraq war is going on. Well, what did the US do there? Remember, we're supporting Saddam Hussein with intelligence and with funding and make it easier for him to trade on the international stage. Let's talk about Iran Contra just with this video.
When it came time to take things to the next level, I knew that I had to make a website, and Wix was perfect.
In the presidential campaign, Reagan promised to assist anti-communist insurgencies around the world. For a brief time under Reagan, the CIA trained and assisted groups fighting communist leaders abroad. Reagan was particularly interested in a group called the Contras and their battle in Nicaragua. The Contras were a group battling the Cuban-backed Sandinistas, a communist group who had seized power in 1979. Reagan called the Contras the moral equivalent of our founding fathers. But much of the Contras' funding came from the cocaine trade. Because of this, Congress passed the Bolin Amendment, specifically aimed at keeping American money from funding the group. That happened in 1982, shortly after Reagan took office. The amendment restricted the CIA and Department of Defense from using funds to provide military assistance to groups that were trying to overthrow Nicaragua's government, groups like the Contras. This didn't stop Reagan. The president told his national security advisor, Robert McFarlane, to help the Contras anyway, regardless of the cost. McFarlane found opportunity in Iran. In 1985, an Iranian-backed terrorist group held 7 American hostages in Lebanon. Reagan insisted his advisors find a way to bring the hostages home, saying, "I want you to do whatever you have to do to help these people keep body and soul together." So with permission from Reagan, McFarlane made a deal. The U.S. would give Iran weapons, and Iran would broker the release of the hostages. This happened even though Reagan publicly insisted he would not negotiate with terrorists, and despite the fact that there was a trade embargo with Iran. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. The deal with Iran didn't just secretly secure the release of the hostages in exchange for weapons. There was money involved. While $30 million had been allocated for the weapons, the CIA funneled a portion of that money to the Contras in Nicaragua, the group Reagan supported in their guerrilla fight against the Sandinista government. In 1986, the Lebanese newspaper Al Shura reported the arms deal, and everything began to unravel. That prompted an investigation by the U.S. Attorney General, who discovered that only $12 million of the $30 million actually went toward weapons for Iran. The rest of the money was sent to the Contras in Nicaragua. The revelation revelations were explosive. Reagan denied the allegations that he had negotiated with terrorists. But Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North came forward and acknowledged that he diverted funds to the Contras. North also said Reagan knew about it. North's testimony would inspire the press and Congress to launch investigations against Reagan for the rest of his presidency. Texas Senator John Tower led the investigation into the scandal. The Tower Commission determined it was Reagan's lack of oversight that allowed Iran-Contra to happen, but did not implicate Reagan directly. It wasn't until another congressional investigation in 1987 that Reagan finally testified. On May 5, 1987, joint hearings were televised investigating the covert arms deal with Iran and the assistance to Nicaragua. The hearings would go on for 41 days. Reagan was never charged, but McFarlane, Oliver North, 4 CIA officers, 5 government contractors, and Reagan's national security advisor, John Poindexter, were all found guilty. Yet, speculation about Reagan's involvement lingered on. Press investigations would go on for years to follow. While Reagan's image suffered a bit, he still left office with one of the highest approval ratings of any president in U.S. history.
What was the last thing that he said? He left with one of the highest approval ratings in history. When he died, he laid in state for days as people circled his corpse in Washington. I grew up in the 80s. He was incredibly popular. His second election, his reelection, he won by one of the biggest landslides in history, maybe the biggest landslide in history. I think he won every place but Minnesota and Washington, D.C. He was enormously popular for many reasons. That doesn't mean everything he did was right. What it means is that he had great appeal to the broadly across a broad spectrum of society in the United States. He had been an actor. So he was, very polished and very charismatic as a speaker. But one of the things that he did coming into the 80s is he said, I want to make America um, proud again. I want to make Americans proud to be Americans again. And by taking on the Soviet Union and reigniting the Cold War in that sort of hot manner, really militarily challenging the Soviets, uh, funding the Mujahideen, funding all of these other things. When he comes in, the people, nothing sticks to him. He's going to be called the Teflon president. So, this Iran Contra affair, popularly, Democrats will use this to revile him that he's funding these cocaine dealing rebels. Uh, but and also dealing with terrorists. But what was he doing? Trying to free hostages. So those that support him will say he's doing everything he can to free hostages. That was his motive. So they're not questioning his motive, even though others are looking at his means. Okay. So men like Oliver North will go on to be politicians from Virginia. He'll at one time be the president of the NRA. So while he is reviled and grilled in front of Congress, there will be those that support him so much from the conservative side that he'll go on to have an impressive career following his initial, being found guilty of crimes and so forth, as will others that come out of this. So look at what exactly happened in Iran Contra. What was not said there was the reason Iran needed those weapons. Remember, we had supported the Iranian regime up until the revolution in 79. If they were going to keep fighting against Iraq, they needed to be resupplied with ammunition and weaponry for their American planes and tanks and so forth. You understand? And we were the ones who could supply it. It needed to come from us. You understand? So, seeing an opportunity to also fund the Contras doing this already illegal thing, Oliver North took the initiative to funnel some of it to the Contras. And when the Lebanese press began reporting on what they had found out, that's what let it all out of the bag. All of this is cranking up the Cold War in the 1980s after a period of easing relations, crawling out of Vietnam. In Eastern Europe, we're seeing in Poland the establishment of Solidarity, a non state workers' union in Gdansk, in these seaside cities of workers wanting, striking for freedoms, freedom of speech, the freedom to release political prisoners. And the head of Solidarity is Lech Walesa. The Soviets are saying to their puppet government there, you need to shut this down, impose martial law, keep order. Who's the man down in between them? This is the new Pope, John Paul II, who is Polish, who comes out in support of Solidarity. Now, the church might not have an official part of society in the communist bloc, but that doesn't mean that the people have forgotten it. They are still faithful, even if it's not acknowledged in society. So he becomes a powerful and charismatic voice during the 80s as protests begin to erupt. You see, during the 50s and the 60s, when there were uprisings in the Warsaw Pact, such as the Hungarian Revolution in 56 or the Prague Spring in 68, this is what initiated the Brezhnev Doctrine. In Czechoslovakia, in Prague, and their capital, like many places in the 60s, there was reform, call for popular reform by young people. The Soviets rolled in with their tanks and said, absolutely not. We will put this down. And one of the things that I always remember about this is I'm a big hockey fan. And Jaromir Jagr wears the number 68 to memorialize the Prague Spring, wherein his grandfather was killed in the uprising. We're coming out of the 70s and into the 80s to the mid 80s. A lot of the old men are dead, and the communists will elect to the general secretary of the party, to this position, a younger man, Mikhail Gorbachev. And they're going to allow him to institute changes, radical changes, by the mid 80s. By the mid 70s, they see that they're running at a loss, spending more than they can make. They're not making enough food or essential goods. People are waiting in long lines for things like bread and toilet paper. And what they're getting is not very good. And having to spend to keep up with the United States and fight in Afghanistan is just destroying them. Gorbachev has 5 key points. 1, we're going to have a less restrictive society. You see, growing up in the 80s, it was very common in the news to hear about people that were defecting from the Soviet Union, professional athletes, artists, all sorts of people. If they were touring in the United States, often they would defect. They would leave their handlers and seek asylum so that they could stay here in the United States. The Soviet Union was a closed society. So he is suggesting openness, a less repressive government that dictates what can and cannot be said, a greater openness, freedom of expression. He says we must also restructure our economy so that we can slowly decentralize it and gradually make capitalist reforms. Third, we will no longer intervene in other countries. We will no longer invade in our satellite countries. Fourth, we will reform the KGB from a secret police into something more like the Secret Service in the United States, something to protect the heads of state. And 5, we will reform the Communist Party. Again, the people are waiting in long lines for things like meat and milk. He publishes these ideas in books so that peoples everywhere can read about this. He says the people in Russia need to be able to talk more freely amongst themselves, less censorship. Perestroika, he was looking for a very moderate growth rate of 4% with free market structures that would operate within the existing communist command political structures. Unfortunately, these reforms moved too slowly. The economic reforms were moving in the direction he wanted, but was moving too slowly. And the new openness proved to the peoples that when they could talk to each other, things were even worse than they knew they were. We are in a bad shape. Gorbachev and Reagan successfully eliminate an entire class of nuclear weapons, the intermediate range, battlefield level nuclear missiles that they began pushing into Europe when Reagan came in. they will get rid of all of them in 1987, which was a major move. And I even remember from my childhood, everyone talking about what a major move this is. They got rid of a whole class of nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, we in our period have allowed this to expire and did not renew it. So these things are back. Reagan says in Berlin, this Berlin Wall has been here since the early 60s, a big, ugly symbol of separation and partition between the communist world and the free world. Gorbachev is saying that he seeks peace, but everywhere we look in the communist world, we see failure and backwardness. If Gorbachev really means that he seeks liberalization, come here to this gate and tear down this wall, this ugly symbol of division that Germans cannot be with each other in their traditional capital. And I remember this very well because I was well into my teens by this point. And one night, as it was getting close to the holidays in the fall, people started jumping up onto it. And then they started chipping into it and tearing it down because it seemed like the Soviets just weren't interested in intervening anymore. And it was an ecstasy. It was a group ecstasy as the Germans celebrated for days and days and days as they partied and took down the wall because it seemed like it would be there forever. The Soviets were so close to us, or at least that's how it was presented to us, that we didn't know, as I'm speaking for myself as an American citizen, about all their internal troubles. Not really. So that when the wall came down, it really was like magic. I remember David Hasselhoff gave a concert on top of the wall. Here, let's watch a little.
Imagine incredibly fast, refreshingly reliable fiber-to-the-home internet. Now imagine friendly support.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Reporting tonight from Berlin.
From the Berlin Wall specifically, take a look at them. They've been there since last night. They are here in the thousands. They are here in the tens of thousands. Occasionally they shout, Die Mauer muss weg, the wall must go. Thousands and thousands of West Germans come to make the point that the wall has suddenly become irrelevant. Something, as you can see, almost to party on. How do you measure such an astonishing moment in history? The East German government said tonight they were going to make more openings in the wall, at least a dozen more, put bulldozers right through the wall so that more people could cross to the west. The East German communist leadership tonight said there'd be a new election law guaranteeing secret elections which the rest of the world could monitor. And only 24 hours after East Germans were told they could go anywhere, anytime, the Soviet Union said that was a sensible move. Thousands of East Germans came across the border today, perhaps more than 100,000, so many that border police lost count. And at every border crossing, thousands of West Germans there to say welcome. Some of the really good news today was for the East German government. While thousands and thousands came to look, even gape at this showcase of capitalism, the vast majority said they would be going back. The simple act of giving people the freedom to travel may have convinced East Germans they need not take flight whenever the door opens just a fraction. It has been an astonishing day. Hour after hour, all through today, thousands and thousands of West Germans have come to the wall to see for themselves, to climb up on this hideous structure, to finally look down at what has been no man's land for so long. Finally, after all these years, to say in person what they think of the East German border guards, or try to make friends. Suddenly, a flashback to what it was like for so long. A young man in the East makes a dash for the wall. They catch him and take him away. Presumably, he should have used a legal border crossing. Only a couple of years ago, he might have been shot. Not today. Today, it was possible to have a dialogue. Your government seems to be changing every day. Where do you think it's going? That's the government's problem, he says, not mine. Such an astonishing moment in history. Now, what's it feel like to be standing on top of the wall?
It's incredible for me. It's I can't describe really my feelings. It's something unreal for me.
If there is someone who sleeps for 8 weeks and you told him what happened here, he thinks you're crazy. It's unthinkable.
Unthinkable. Tonight at the border crossings, including Checkpoint Charlie, which is normally a crossing for non-Germans only, there was still a block-long gauntlet of goodwill. Here, as everywhere else, it is one breathtaking moment after another. The new arrivals in their tiny, smoke-belching cars were greeted like athletes, patted on the back and cheered forward, sometimes pushed forward. Many of the East Germans were stunned by it all. I've been waiting 28 years for this, he told us. Will you come permanently, we asked. How long will you stay? I haven't much money, he said, but I'll stay till I run out of gas.
Hi, I'm Brett.
And I'm Jonathan.
This is Darla.